Getting beat up by spreadsheets in your brewery? Don't let those dumb pivot tables bully you around. Get rid of the spreadsheets and the other clunky brewery software and get Ollie, the smart and affordable way to manage your brewery. Learn more at getollie.com.
Good afternoon. I'm Shana Metzger from the Barnes Beverage Group. Thank you to the craft beer professionals for having me today. I'm going to speak a little bit about some marketing advertising rules for every beverage product that you sell. As I'm sure most of you have learned the hard way, a lawyer's favorite answer to almost any question is, it depends. And yes, I am a lawyer. But today I'm going to try to steer clear of the it depends gray zone and focus on some clear-cut black and white advertising rules. And there's no need for concern. This is easy stuff. So let's get going. Okay, so today's presentation, we're going to talk a bit about advertising generally, advertising the mandatories, prohibited practices, trade practice considerations, specifically social media, trade association marketing codes, and then we'll dive into the NA and hemp-derived products. So most of this will focus on the alcohol beverages, but we'll get into the other stuff too, so don't worry. Advertising generally. The golden rule of advertising is don't be deceptive or unfair in your advertising. If you follow this rule, you're going to avoid a vast majority of both TTB and FTC concerns. Now, the TTB, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, says that an advertisement can be many things, but they define an ad as any written or verbal statement, illustration, or depiction which induces or is calculated to induce sales. So here's the thing. I'm not in your business, but I can go out on a limb and assume that you are trying to sell your product. And so think about anything that is not your label as an advertisement. So some examples: radio spots, sell sheets, point of sale items, your website, and most importantly, social media posts. Now, there are some mandatories that you must have to be in accordance with the TTB rules. This information must appear on every single communication that can be considered an advertisement by the federal government. We're going to look at responsible advertiser, drink responsibly language, and the type and class. When advertising spirits product, you must also include the alcohol content and the percentage of neutral spirits that you're using in the product. So, what's a responsible advertiser? That sounds a lot more complicated than it really is. What it is the name, the city and state of the alcohol advertiser, or in your case, the supplier, manufacturer, or the name, phone number, website, email. Basically, what they want to know is who is producing the product, who is producing, like, that the advertisement is about, and how do we get in touch with them if we have questions. There's drink responsibly language, and then the class and type, what the product belongs to, and this should correspond with the information that's shown on your cola. So, for example, ale, beer, lager. So here's an example of a company, a manufacturer that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, that has done just this. So here, this is a Boston lager, It has an image of the can. So that covers, what type of the class and the type. At the bottom, it says the Boston Beer Company and then their website. And the website brings you to where you can find all of their contact information and then savor the flavor responsibly. Now, there is an exception. If your ad refers to a general product line or all of the company products, then the only mandatory information that you need to have on there is the responsible advertiser's name, city, and state, or the name and other contact information, telephone number, website, email address, where the responsible advertiser may be contacted. Now we get into the, shouldn't do that. These are the prohibited practices. We'll get into some of these in a little bit more detail later, but for now, please keep these in mind during this presentation. And I apologize if it looks a little wonky on your screen. Sharing sometimes makes things, screws up with the formatting a bit. First, false and misleading. We started at the beginning. Don't want to do that. Health claims. If you can't put it on your label, you can't put it in your advertising. And so make sure that you're not making any unwarranted health claims. Disparaging competitors. We're all in the same boat here, and let's not disparage the person next to you because you never know when, you're going to have to work with them. Also, you want to make sure that your advertisement is consistent with your approved labels. Back to the cola. Is it an ale? Is it a porter? Whatever it is. Keep obscenity out of it. You don't want misleading guarantees. And then flags and military symbols. This is something that is interesting because the government doesn't want to be associated with your product in saying, hey, we endorse or we have created this. So keep flags and military symbols out of it, unless it's a designation of where your product comes from. So let's say it's an American brewed product. You may be able to get away with an American flag, but always consult legal counsel for what can be on your can or your bottles or your other labels to know what can go in the advertisement. And on that note, misleading nutritionals. It's the same as the health claims. If you can't have it on your label, you can't have it in your advertisement. Trade practice considerations. There are some general rules and exceptions here. I'm sure you are all familiar with inducements and the Tide House. Tide House just seems like such a foreign concept before you get into this world, and then it becomes second nature. Advertising activities and materials that can lead to trade practice violations when you are paying for crediting a retailer for any advertising, providing something of value to a retailer, like mentioning them in an advertisement, paid for or placed by an industry member, or entering into cooperative advertisement agreements with retailers. Now, there are a few exceptions to this Tide House. You want to make sure that you keep your independence and that nothing that you do is viewed as a potential inducement or a payment to a retailer. That's not good. Now, there are a couple exceptions. Certain product displays, POS materials for use by a retailer, consumer advertising specialties, outdoor signs. And then glassware falls into a tied house exception when sold to a retailer at or above cost. Now, these are general exceptions, but note that each state may have specific exceptions or specific rules that go above and beyond federal. So you may want to take a look at where you're advertising and the laws and regulations in that state to make sure that everything is above board. Now, involving the retailer. Now, this is something that I hear my clients say to me all the time. Well, so-and-so did it. So-and-so did it. Yes, I understand that a lot of people do these things that may not necessarily be within the regulations. So ultimately, it's going to be a risk-reward type of analysis. And that's something, again, to talk to legal counsel about. But generally speaking, you can't mention a retailer by name in an advertisement. That is giving them something of value. Something of value just doesn't have to be money. So, or something that is tangible. So think about it like that. And you definitely cannot enter into a shared advertising agreement with a retailer. Of course, I know I said we wouldn't do any of the it depends, but these are exceptions. So depending on the state, there are certain exceptions for being able to advertise a retailer by name. In some states, you can pre-announce a brand activation or a consumer sampling event or, a pop-up where the supplier employees are actually present with boots on the ground. So you can't just send your product and have the retailer, do a sampling for you. You actually have to have someone from your brewery or working on your behalf there. You cannot advertise a retailer's specials or menu features, but you can, if it's not actually present to conduct, if you're not actually present to conduct the event. The pre-announcement must be focused on the brand. The mentioning of the retailer is kind of secondary. So you're launching a new RTD. Come on down and try the greatest and best new seltzer from blank brewery. We'll be there. Come join us and try it out. It will be at this bar from this time to this time. So you can do that in many states. The second thing you could do in many states is you could tell consumers where to find the products in a post, in a social media post, or in some sort of advertisement in a newspaper or something. But you can factually list only 2 or more unaffiliated retailers. That's to tell them where they can find your products. So unaffiliated means under separate ownership. So for example, 2 Chili's restaurants or 2 Trader Joe's locations would each count as one retailer. So be mindful of that. The One time where you can mention a retailer in almost every state is on your own personal brand website of where to find the product in a store locator, because it's just a list of all the stores that carry your products. And that's generally not seen as providing something of value to a specific retailer. And that's almost always acceptable in the States. So that's why if you go to someone's website and you're like, but they're based in this state and they have a retailer, if it's just a list of where to find the products, it's generally acceptable. Now we get into the sponsored content. So for any content in which the brand is integrated, organizers and posters must use proper disclosures to show that the brand's involvement. Here are some examples of magic words that you should use. Ad, advertisement, paid advertisement, sponsoring advertisement content. Note that this disclosure must appear where the content is promoted and where the content is actually viewed. It must appear above the fold. So, for example, on a mobile device where there's a truncated version of the content, the disclosure must appear within the first 2 lines of the visible content. The consumer shouldn't have to click in order to view the disclosures. They must be immediately evident. For videos, that means the disclosure must be at the beginning of the video as well as in the video description. It's not sufficient to make a disclosure on the end card. It must appear where it's promoted and where the content is actually viewed. And if the content can be shared, then the disclosures must stay with the content. Tweets, retweets, reposts. A lot of people say, oh, well, so-and-so drafted this. I saw that they were talking about our brand, so we just retweeted it. General rule, any retweet or repost by your organization, your brewery, your employees, it counts as if your own company is doing the advertising. And this is a federal stance. This isn't state by state. You're going to be held to the same advertising standards as you would be if you created the content yourself. So keep that in mind when you are deciding to like or retweet or repost something. Now, your own events, if you're going to host an event, all applicable guidelines and regulations regarding advertising applies to your events and your event marketing. So keep that in mind. All right, now we get to the social media stuff, which is every day becoming more and more prevalent and a bigger part of everyone's business. Couple of general rules. The general rule for advertising still applies. All mandatories are required and prohibited practices are prohibited. Specific rule, posts made by influencers or others can be considered your advertising if they've been compensated to post or your account reposts the content. Tips, always require disclosure of sponsored posts and be cautious of interacting with retailers on social media. Now we're going to get into some platform-specific training. Your own website. I'm sure almost every one of you have a website. If you don't, probably a good idea to, create at least a basic one. If you are selling alcohol products, you must use an age gate, which is the affirmation month day employed for beverage alcohol advertising marketing websites, which I'm sure you know. Provide a link to a responsible decision-making website. And if there's downloadable information on your page, include a note not to forward to individuals under the age of 21. So even if someone who's not of the age of 21 can't visit your site, but someone wants to send them something, make sure that they know that you can't forward that information to someone who's under the age of 21. So, couple of examples. Here's an age gate. Welcome. Are you of legal drinking age? So this is just a yes or no. Others, I'm sure either on your own website or you've seen, have you put in your date of birth. Either one is acceptable as a age gate for these types of websites. Now at the bottom, here's something from Boston Beer Company. We have terms and conditions, privacy policy, and a link to a responsibility page. So these are things that you should have on your website. Now, anywhere you host a page to induce sales and increase brand awareness and loyalty by allowing industry members to communicate directly with the consumers in an interactive manner, the TTB generally views those and the posts contained within as a single ad. These pages must comply with all of the regulatory requirements that apply to advertisements that we've talked about in this presentation. So here are a few others. So an opening page on, this looks like it's a LinkedIn. You're going to have where they're located. This is a brand name in Columbus, Ohio, and you have a link to their website where you can contact them. Over here, this is a posting from a clip from, it looks like a social media, probably Instagram. And this is Samuel Adams, samueladams.com. So you can go to their website and their contact information of where they're located. Also, only for 21 plus crowd. And that's being a responsible advertiser. Now we get into platform specific. Twitter, or I guess it's called X now, and Tumblr, these sort of microblogs. Due to the character limitations of these microblogs, the TTB only requires the mandatory statements to appear in the ad in a way that is readily apparent, conspicuous, and legible. So you may include the mandatory statements on your profile page or use a descriptive link that takes the user to a separate page with the mandatory statements. Here you see New Belgium, Fort Collins, Colorado, and Asheville, North Carolina, newbelgium.com. And this is on their main page. The media sharing sites, this is Instagram, YouTube, these allow individuals or companies to post media, such as photographs, GIFs, videos, to a website to be viewed and commented on by the public. The TTB views these sites and posts on them as a single advertisement. However, where the photograph or video are being posted to a site and are not associated with a profile section that bears mandatory information regarding the product, the industry member must include a mandatory statement with a photo or video themselves. And this applies if the industry member allows viewers to download or share content, since the industry member is then considered to have disseminated the video content. So here, again, we see the mandatory statement in the profile. And here we go, 21 plus to enjoy, where you can contact them, where they're based. But also on the individual media if it's something that you can share. And here's a post. We have the garage beer, what type of beer it is, and if you view it, you can see, how to contact them and click back. For frame formats like stories, disclosures must be superimposed over the images or in the videos of each frame. Audio only isn't sufficient if the video is, if it's in a video format. Influencers. Influencers are pretty big deal these days. And brands want to be associated with an influencer. Now, social media influencers are personas on social media who have audiences or followers on the specific platforms who sometimes use their influence to persuade their audience to purchase products. Materials produced by these social media influencers on behalf of an alcohol beverage industry member for the purpose of inducing sales of that industry member's products in interstate or foreign commerce must comply with the TTB advertising regulations that we have discussed in this presentation. So, who is the influencer, right? These people can be compensated by paying them money, giving them stock shares, giving them free products, etc., for the endorsement of a product or for product placement of an associated activity. Make sure your influencers disclose the relationship that these posts are paid for, or that they are doing this as an influencer, not just out of the goodness of their heart because they love your brand. Now, if they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart because they love your brand and you not on your behest, then that's different. But there are certain things that the TTB will consider in making a determination on whether or not they are doing this for you. It's whether or not an industry member has directly or indirectly, or through an affiliate published or disseminated the advertisement, or if they were compensated directly or indirectly by the industry member in return for the endorsement. So let's say you have a media company that you're working with to help do your promotions, and they pay an influencer on your behalf, then that's still considered your brand paying for the influencer. So you're going to start with you're going to insist that the influencer start on their post with hashtag ad. And you want them to lead the post with excited, pumped, psyched to officially partner with your brand. Hashtag paid partnership if the influencer doesn't control the post content. And then hashtag brand partnership, or I work for whomever if the employee influencer is sharing the content. All mandatory advertising statements must be included in the same manner as required for industry members' social media sites. So when you're engaging with a social media influencer, you want to make sure that they understand that alcohol beverage products are different. There are different rules associated with these products, and what they would do to, promote a brand of lipstick is not the same thing that they would do to promote your beer. So you have to educate them a bit on, the process. TikTok. I know TikTok is super popular these days, and everyone's doing some sort of TikTok dance. But generally speaking, TikTok has a global ban on alcohol advertising on its app. Now, I know that there are some test markets that they're trying to determine if the ban should remain or not, and they that's still to be determined. So make sure that whatever you do adheres to the advertising guidelines of TikTok. But if you conduct alcohol advertising at all, make sure you conduct to their guidelines and all alcohol guidelines. The biggest issue with that is that generally the TikTok app user age is closer to 50% below the minimum drinking age, and this opens advertisers to higher scrutiny. But if you do engage on TikTok, which many brands are doing, you assume the risks associated with the activities. Now we get into some trade association marketing codes. Now, a couple of trade associations that I'm sure you're familiar with. And if you're not, check them out. DISCUS, which is the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, the Beer Institute, which is for Macro Producers Trades Association, the Brewers Association, which is Small Producers Trade Association, and the Wine Institute. Now, each of these groups have marketing codes that industry members have voluntarily agreed to adhere to. And this is to show the government that the industry is serious about social responsibility and to discourage them from placing additional regulation on alcohol advertising, kind of what they did with cigarettes. So while these are not necessarily law, there are some states that have taken a number of the information that's in the codes and put it into their own state law. So trade association codes differ, but generally address the same issues: the responsible placement, responsible content, and social responsibility. Now, I know that I had mentioned at the beginning some best practices and some things not to do. I'm going to dive in a little bit more on some specifics, and most of these should be pretty common sense, but just going to give a little overview here. Now, I don't know how they came up with this figure, but according to the TTB, the advertising that an alcohol brand must be placed on locations or in a broadcast or social media markets where at least 73.8% of the viewing audience is reasonably expected to be above the age of 21. Well, you ask yourself, well, how do I know if it's at least 73.8%? I'm not really sure. But generally speaking, if you follow all the guidelines and, focus on making sure that your brand is advertising to people above the age of 21, then that's going to help. Here are some other ways to help make sure that the viewing audience is in that percentage of being an appropriate age range. Don't market to college campuses without explicit permission by the appropriate college policy. Colleges are now changing their policies, some of them, but not all of them. A lot of them still have a prohibition against permitting alcohol promotions or advertisements on or near campuses because the majority of the students are under the age of 21. Don't market to or conduct promos on on-campus bars, and don't put billboards up more than 50 feet from a church or elementary school or a high school, unless it's inside of a retail location. If you're using ads to show people drinking, show them drinking responsibly and doing socially approved and acceptable things. Like, use humor, parody, satire, and all the other advertising themes and devices that should be readily identifiable as such, by being humorous and satirical, by reasonable adults of drinking age. But don't portray, encourage, or condone driving, operating machinery, or other dangerous activities while drinking or drunk. Also, there's many prohibitions in certain states against actually showing people drinking alcohol in an advertisement, so keep that in mind as well. But definitely on your social media, in advertisements, do not depict the situations where alcohol is being consumed rapidly, excessively, involuntarily, as part of a drinking game, or as a result of a dare. So no shotgunning, chugging, etc. Don't portray a person as losing control over their behavior, movements, or speech as a result of consuming alcohol in a way that suggests that they are drunk or out of control. Avoid elements that appeal primarily to persons below legal drinking age. Do not use cartoon characters, Santa Claus, music, language, celebrities, or symbols that appeal to persons below the drinking age. Do not feature anyone under 21 years of age in an advertisement that you post, share, or repost. When you're using actors or models in your ads, use someone who is at least 25 years old or older and who appears to be of legal drinking age. And again, advertise in markets where at least 73.8% of the market is expected to be over 21. Beer advertising and marketing materials should not make exaggerated product representations. Don't convey the impression that a beer has a special or unique quality if it doesn't. Don't make scientifically unsubstantiated health claims. If you're distinguishing your product from another product, keep it factual. And then, encourage recycling and don't disparage anti-littering efforts. Some other things is do not employ a religion or religious themes that do contain, you can have romantic or flirtation interactions, but don't portray sexually explicit behavior as a result of consuming alcohol. Do not use any graphic nudity or disparage competing brands. And with that, graphic nudity can also be just very revealing clothing. I know that a brand that got in some trouble because one of the owner's wife is a famous model and her look was a little risque in the ad, and that was not acceptable. So just use your best judgment. Okay. Now, you produce beer, but what if you also produce non-alcoholic products, or now into the hemp-derived products line? This is unfortunately, not a very clear-cut rules federally discussion. This is going to be a state-specific analysis. That's because how the non-alcoholic products are viewed by the state or federal regulators depends on either the product category or the brand as a licensee. So I've had, brands come to me and say, well, so and so did it. For example, you have a brand that is a completely non-alcoholic beer brand. They do not produce any alcoholic beer. So they are able to do some things in the market that you as a licensee, because they are not considered a licensee, they don't have to go through TTB in most instances. They can get away with things that you can't as a licensee. Sometimes the state laws and regulations look at, is your brand, let's say it's a non-alcoholic beer, is it brewed with hops? How is it brewed? Even if it doesn't have alcohol, it may still be considered beer for these regulations. So keep that in mind and either consult your legal counsel or look to the state laws and regulations to see how your product is defined. And then also see how they look at who the regulations apply to, if they apply to the type of product or to the licensee. And if it's the licensee and you have a license to sell alcohol, then you are a licensee. And so you have to follow the same regulations for advertising that you would for your alcohol brands. So keep that in mind. The Discus code for 2025 just updated within the last few weeks, and this update includes that non-alcoholic versions of recognized alcohol categories or established brands are now part of and included in the scope of the code. So keep that in mind. If Discus is saying that, it is likely that the other trade associations will kind of come on board with that same sentiment. Now, hemp beverages are different. The hemp beverage they do have a trade association. For example, the Hemp Beverage Alliance, but they have not published codes for advertising and marketing yet. However, as a licensee, it's always best to stay within the parameters of the other codes. Now, if you are producing hemp and you have a separate brand, a separate entity to produce those under, and you're not producing those under the same entity as your alcoholic beverages, then these codes may not apply to you, but they're really good practices and they will help keep you out of trouble with the TTB, with the state, and with any federal oversight board. So these are things to think about when you're going forward with either the products that you already have that are non-alcoholic or hemp-derived, or the new products that you're thinking of. If you ever have questions, reach out to your counsel, and they'll be able to guide you. If you have any questions about this presentation, here is my contact information. Again, I'm Shana Metzger. I'm Senior Counsel at the Barnes Beverage Group. And feel free to reach out with any questions you have. We love to hear from people, and again, thank you for your time today. And I hope to see you all in person one day. Have a great one. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this session, we'd love to see you in real life. We host in-person workshops across the country for craft beer professionals just like you that are held in some of the most exciting beer destinations around. These immersive events are designed to help you grow and connect with others. You'll meet peers from across the country and leave with actionable strategies for success. Connection has never been more important, and you can learn more at cbpconnects.com. Cheers. See you there.